have known Simon for over 10 years now. Simon is a trained lawyer, and so he understands professional service firms, having worked in law firms and then also consulted to law firms over the last 25 years or so. So he understands how they operate, and he's seen them from both sides of the fence. Simon works with small to medium-sized firms in New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. He's a member of the Law Consultancy Network, which includes a group of consultants based in New Zealand, Australia, and the UK, and I think also Canada. And the Law Consultancy Network, it includes Richard Bircher, who was based in Tauranga. He is now based up in the UK, and he works along with Simon and the Law Consultancy Network, consulting to some sizable UK firms. So what does Simon do? He basically assists with mentoring firms, helping to facilitate workshops. He does an excellent series of workshops as part of team development. And I have assisted Simon doing a segment of one of those workshops for a medium-sized Christchurch firm, doing the financial piece in that workshop, helping to mentor senior team members on their journey through to partnership in the firm. Simon also acts as convener of strategy days for both partners and the management team in firms. And in my experience, he's very clever at ensuring that some of the processes and decisions determined on the day are then followed through and implemented, which is the crucial thing with all firms. And Simon works very well with practice managers, internal accountants, and the management team in smaller firms. I have known Simon for over 10 years. I first attended the Future Firm Forum that he puts on for firms in Australia and New Zealand back in 2011, I think it was, in Tongariro. This year's forum is a scaled down forum due to the circumstances with COVID. It's a one-day event in Queenstown at the Rees Hotel on Friday, the 16th of October. And I will be attending that and have signed up to go. There's some interesting speakers there, including Jeremy Sutton, a family barrister based up here in Auckland, who's been very clever with revolutionising his barrister's practice in the area of family law, and has been very successful in the work that he has done. There are other speakers that Simon might cover, but I really recommend the forum. I have attended, or a partner from our firm has attended every forum in recent years, and they are superb events, and they are a great mixture of quality professional development time and thinking time, but they're also neat events socially to attend. There's usually about 30 people or less at the forum, so it is a nice small group that you really interact with while you're there. So please take advantage of the early bird registration for the forum, which is, if you Google Future Firm Forum, you will go to it straight away at the Rees Hotel, and the early bird registration lasts until the end of the month. Simon, so that's a bit about Simon, and Simon is going to talk to us about leadership in professional service firms, which is something that he knows a huge amount about. So I hand the webinar over to Simon. Welcome.
Hey Sam, thank you very much for those kind words and that introduction. And hello everyone, good afternoon, wherever you may be tuning in from. I understand there is a live audience of quite a few participants at the moment. I'm reading 34, but I believe more than double that number have actually registered, and so they may be watching this as a recording. Just to add on from Sam's introductory words there, those who may be interested in the Future Firm Forum would be predominantly lawyers or legal professionals working inside law firms, or indeed in-house counsel, and the website for that is allwsfuturefirmforum.com. So if you'd like to come along in October, it would be great to see you. But that's not why I'm here today. Sam and Markhams have invited me to talk about a topic that's very close to my heart, and that is the changing face of leadership in professional service firms. And I understand while there may be quite a few lawyers tuned into this webinar today, there will also be people from other professional service firms tuning in. So my comments by definition are going to be fairly generic, but based on my background, which has been entrenched in law, but not exclusively. You may detect an element of bias when it comes to the legal services sector. I've got about 45 minutes that I'd like to share my thoughts with you on this increasingly important topic, and at the end of it, I will invite Sam to moderate a few questions that either he may have or some members of the audience. How I'm going to deal with this session today, firstly I'd like to start with providing some definitions. There are two words there in my title, well actually 4 words I suppose, but the first word being leadership, and the other words being professional service firms. And I would like to just spend a few moments talking about what those 2 words mean and how they relate to each other in today's market. And implicit in the title today is that there is a change taking place, and I need to outline what I think that change is and what the implications are for professional service firms and the partners and of those firms and directors, and what it might mean for their leadership and governance going forward. Of course, COVID has come along this year and has effectively changed a lot of operations in professional service firms, and it's raised as many questions as it has provided answers for leaders of professional service firms. And so what I'd like to do is to share with you some of the observations that I've made over the past 3 months. During that time, I've had the opportunity to conduct quite a few of these webinars, sometimes as the host in discussion with other leaders to assess how they're coping with many of the challenges that they've had to deal with over the past few weeks. And I'll share with you some of their responses as we go through this webinar this afternoon. And to wrap up, I'll also give you my own thoughts about what leaders of professional service firms can do going forward from now on amidst all of this uncertainty. So that's the structure for my session today. And perhaps I can just go back to the title, The Changing Face of Leadership in Professional Service Firms. I became a professional, if I can call it that, a qualified lawyer back in the mid-80s. And back then, of course, the partnership model was dominant and has been a very successful business model for professional service firms for about the past 40 or 50 years. And when we think about the pillars of their success, I think they revolve around 3 key areas. Firstly, they've been very financially successful and very focused on results, results-based, largely based on profit. They've secondly been very successful based on the relationships that advisors in professional service firms have been able to craft predominantly with clients. And thirdly, they've been successful because of their reputation. They've been able to craft reputation through expertise, through providing valuable solutions to clients. So results, relationships, and reputation, I think, have provided the key platform for successful professionals in previous years. And I have to say right up front that I don't think that platform has necessarily changed, but I think what is changing is the world outside, and therefore the role that professional service firms are going to have to play in the future. And I'll talk about that change in just a few moments. But in talking about professional service firms, who are we talking about? Because professional service firms underpin the functioning of the economy on a global basis. They account for a very large sector of the global economy. Even if one were to look at its narrowest definition, law, accountants, management consultants might be the main professions that creep to mind. But in 2016, there were statistics that suggested that those three professional service firm groups alone accounted for turnover of over 1.6 trillion US dollars globally. Those three sectors employ 16 million people globally. And then when you expand the definition of professional service firms beyond those three sectors to include the likes of architecture, engineering, advertising, financial services, medicine and health, and even teaching, then we begin to see that the sector, or the definition of professional service firms, is actually very large indeed. And so I believe that historically, professional service firms have done a huge amount to help to develop business and to shape the society that we now live in. But the world is changing, not because of COVID, but it's been changing for quite some time. And I believe that in the world of business, we are seeing a fundamental shift in how we go about doing business. And in society, we're also seeing a fundamental shift in terms of what our expectations are. And those expectations vary across generations. But I've been alarmed for a number of years at how poorly many professional service firms have actually run themselves. And I say that because statistically, there's no shortage of figures pointing to low engagement levels in firms, toxic workplaces, a high degree of skepticism amongst many clients, the pervasive, or some might say invasive, use of technology, which is eroding a lot of low-level jobs. We've seen the rise of an increasing number of professional executives into professional service firms, so the likes of marketing managers, information technology managers, and which I think is a good thing. And also societally, I think there's been eroding trust as well, eroding trust in our institutions, in our governments. If you look at the Edelman Barometer of Trust, which is an annual survey done globally every year, you'll see that the graph is gradually going down. And that offers a snapshot of the society in which professional service firms are working in. Now, some people out there may say, look, professional service firms have a damn good track record. They're financially successful. They've conducted themselves very well, by and large, in recent years. Why the need for change? Why is leadership changing in these firms? And my answer is this, that if one looks at the dynamics in professional service firms historically, one finds that they have been successful without leadership. I know it's a strange thing to say, but I do believe that the business model of most professional service firms has been built around partnership. And by definition, partnership has introduced a strange degree of ambiguity into the way that their firms have been run. It's been leadership by consensus rather than by an individual or a small group of individuals. And I suppose the notion of leadership in a corporate context has not been easily transferable into a professional service firm or partnership context, because many professionals actually don't want to be led. They don't want one of their peers telling them what to do. And one of the attractions of partnership for many professionals is the autonomy that comes with the job, the ability to get on with the job, the ability to lead perhaps a small practice group, but to basically get on with the job and to be well rewarded for the tasks that he or she carries out. But when you try to reconcile that success in the past, and it is, by the way, very well documented by Professor Laura Empson, who's a professor at the University Business School, rather, in London, which is the university I went to many, many years ago. Too many years to remember now, but she wrote an excellent paper in 2015, which went on to be published in a book about leading rainmakers in professional service firms. And I rather like the subtext to her title in her book, which is Power, Politics and Prima Donnas. And in many ways, I think that probably sums up the leadership culture in professional service firms historically. But there are many people who would observe that for many years, professional service firms have had it pretty good. They've been self-policing, largely self-policing, self-regulating, high barriers to entry, and some would say even opaque. And writers like Richard Susskind, who of course is an advocate for the increasing adaptation of an application of technology in professional service firms, would point to the fact that it would be probably folly for professional service firms to rest on their laurels and to turn their back on how the environment is changing for professional service firms. So the underlying message that I'm saying here is that the status quo, I don't believe, is sustainable. Whilst the business model and the way of leading firms in the past may have worked well for professional service firms, I do believe that perpetuation of that system has its dangers and its pitfalls. And I think as a result, many professional service firms are possibly vulnerable. Is size an issue? Possibly. I think leadership is required in all sizes of professional service firms. I think in some ways, the smaller the firm you are, the easier it is to actually bring about change. But certainly I think it's fair to say that in the larger professional service firms, they've got their management pretty well down to a fine tea. But even in those large firms, leadership is difficult, and it can be promoted, it can be introduced, not just through learning and education across all levels of a firm, but also I think through tweaking the governance, which is obviously a vital aspect to all of this. I think it's the very heartbeat of a professional service firm. That is the way that we choose as fellow colleagues to be governed in our own firms. More on that in just a few moments. Let me, if I may, read you a quote from the World Economic Forum, which has been an advocate for change in the way that we do business. And it reflects the shift that's taking place in business. And I'll talk about the shift in a few moments, but I wanted to share with you this quote, and it's from May last year, in which the World Economic Forum said, "A big shift in management and leadership is long overdue. The old model, carrot and stick, toxic leadership in organizations based on fear and control, do not work. A new model is needed. A model where leadership has not only a functioning radar to understand what is happening across the company, but also a moral compass to steer the ship in the right direction, guided by ethical choices and responsibilities. Not merely a change, but a true shift towards humane leadership, where trust and respect permeate organizations." So that is a quote from the World Economic Forum that's not just reflective of a shift in management and leadership in professional service firms, but right across the board. And that shift that I've been referring to has been taking place for, I'd say, the past 25 years. I came into management in a law firm environment back in 1992. And when I did, my role then was as a marketing manager of a 22-partner law firm. And I recall at that time, feeling acutely the need for the firm to have a more robust executive function, if I could call it that. At that time, it was effectively myself and the chief financial officer, and also a human resources manager. And I also recall feeling the tension between the executive department and the rest of the partnership. And of course, power lay with the partners. They're the ones that have the vote. They are the shareholders in the business. Those that are appointed in an executive support role, for want of a better word, they're nevertheless executive professionals. Generally, at least in New Zealand, don't have the vote. And in the law firm environment, they're not allowed to have a shareholding in a law firm at the moment, although that may change. In the UK, it has already changed thanks to the Legal Services Act, and executive professionals are now allowed to effectively be partners or directors in professional service firms, and particularly in their law firms. And I think that's obviously a significant development, and obviously adds to the leadership mix in professional service firms. As far back as the early 90s, John Elkington, the author and business guru, coined the phrase the triple bottom line. And it was a reference to the shift in the focus, or the shift in the purpose behind most businesses, away from not just profit, which was the single bottom line, to the triple bottom line, to reflect environmental considerations, as he defines as planet, and community or people considerations. So people, planet, and profit is what effectively sums up the triple bottom line. And I said earlier that one of the pillars of success for professional service firms has been their ability to make money in recent years. And one of the attractions of partnership, at least financial attractions, of course, has been, the key to, a very good living. Thank you very much. But what I think is changing is this external environment in which businesses are now increasingly pursuing a more sustainable and socially responsible agenda, whereby the focus is no longer just on making money as a measure of success, but increasingly looking at the contributions that businesses make to their communities, to their society and the environment. And this is no longer just an option for many businesses. Indeed, it is required by law. The Companies Act in the UK has now made it mandatory for company directors to take into account the consideration of stakeholders, not just shareholders. So this change, I think, has come about as a result of societal preferences, not just legislation, changes in the world. And, I look back and think, when I qualified back in 1985, the mantra amongst politicians and economists then, people like Milton Friedman, was to say it's okay to make as much money as you want so long as you don't break the law. And Friedman went on record in 1971 for actually saying that. And that became the mantra for many businesses around the world, and indeed for professional service organizations supporting those businesses, to say it's okay, we are here to help you make money so long as you don't get into trouble with the law. And then along has come in the early 90s an increasing group of politicians and indeed economists and business leaders, including people recognized like Richard Branson, who've gotten together and say, is the purpose of a business just to make money? And it's an interesting debate, and one that you could have, I'm sure, in your firms. And most people would say, well, if it's not about the money, then what is it about? I rather like the management guru Peter Drucker's comment, which he wrote and made many years ago. And he said that profit to a business is like oxygen for a human being. You need it to stay alive, but if you think your sole purpose in life is about breathing, then you're missing the point. And in the same vein, what he's really saying is that business is not just about profit. You need it to survive. It is the lifeblood of any business. And if you're not making a profit, you're not in the game. But if all you're doing is existing in order to make money, then you are missing out on something. David Maister, I recall, the world guru, now retired, the writer of professional service firms, hugely influential in the 90s and the early 2000s, once drew the distinction between being a professional and being a prostitute. And he basically said, if the only reason you're doing it is because of the money, then you're no better than a prostitute. Professionals are people who care. People in professional service firms care. They give a damn. They want to make a difference in people's lives, in the lives of their clients and their various stakeholders. And so I think we have to bear that in mind too, that as professionals, we're here to make a difference, to use our expertise and our knowledge base, because most professionals are specialists in knowledge, and they are there to facilitate, they're there to promote business, to help businesses grow, to alleviate and minimize risk, and encourage people to get on in life. So to come back on the argument that, well, it's all about the money, I think is a bit of a fallacy. But nevertheless, in realistic terms, we all know that partners meeting often tend to focus on how much money have we made in the last quarter. And I think economic data is no measure of success in today's future-looking professional service firm. It's an important measure, but it's not the sole one. So I think one aspect of this, of results, is that we're moving away from just profit and focusing on a more corporately sustainable and socially responsible agenda, and one which I think needs to be built into the governance of every professional service firm. And it requires those firms to address the question, what's the point and what are we here for? And in my experience, a lot of professional service firms have not actually had that discussion. The partnership deed might specify voting rights, voting shares, even succession plan, but it doesn't actually cover this issue, because a lot of professional service firms in the past have said, well, it's implicit what we do. We're lawyers, or we're accountants, or we're management consultants, we're engineers. Isn't that the business we're in? No, it goes deeper than that. It requires firms to actually have a discussion about, what do we want to be remembered for? What is the contribution we're going to make to our communities, to our society, using our expertise? And at the end of the day, do you want to be just remembered as a professional at your funeral and say, here lies someone who made a profit? Or do you want to be a professional who has people saying at your funeral, here lies someone who did a whole raft of things that really made an impact in the world? And I think there's a tremendous opportunity, given the power and influence that professionals have in our society, to do much more and achieve much more than we have done historically in the past. So I talked about the 3 pillars. I've talked about results and how people are redefining what it means to be successful in professional service firms. And therefore, it's important and imperative for professional service firms, through their governance and through their leadership, however that may be defined, to incorporate into their governance some important measures of success that aren't just based on economic data, but other measures of success relating to results, outcomes, the morale, well-being of the people who work in those organizations, and other stakeholders who have a vested interest in the success of your firm. The second pillar I want to talk about is relationships. We all know that professionals have been great at crafting relationships with clients in the past. But certainly from a legal perspective, a lot of those relationships have been based on lawyers giving advice and intervening on a transactional basis, rather than more of a deeper relationship basis. What do I mean by that? So say, for example, you talked about a divorce lawyer earlier on, Jeremy Sutton. Sam, been very successful with his practice. I'm not holding Jeremy up as an icon in this particular field or an exemplar, but I'm just using family law as an example. So somebody who's going through a divorce might walk into a divorce lawyer's or family lawyer's office and say, our relationship's not going well. What are my rights? And, I need a divorce. Now, the real issue at a very human level in that client, it might well be that he or she is still in love with his wife or his partner and doesn't actually want a divorce, but feels perhaps that's the only way out. And I think part of the responsibility of the professional is to actually say, is that what you really, really want? Or is there something deeper that's actually going on for you as a human being, or other circumstances that you're not sharing with me that I need to know about, so that I can actually address this on a much more holistic basis, rather than just on more of a sort of a compacted, isolated case on its own. I recall having this conversation many years ago with a wonderful writer called Steve Keever, who wrote a book in the late 90s called Transforming Practices. And it was written for lawyers. He was a writer with the American Bar Association, but it was about finding joy and satisfaction in the legal law, in the legal life rather. And his book acknowledged the fact that for a lot of lawyers, they found it very unfulfilling, almost ignoring the human dimension behind giving advice to a lot of their clients. And I recall in that discussion I had with him, he talked about a situation where he'd been talking with a young lawyer, a corporate lawyer, in fact, with the director or partner of this particular law firm, with a client that came and said, I want to sell my business. And the partner of the law firm was rubbing his hands saying, great, we can help you with that. That's great. And the partner turned to the young associate there and said, have you got any questions you think we should be asking this client? And the young associate, yes, he said, yes, I do. I'm looking at your body language. I said, I want to ask you, do you really, really in your heart of hearts actually want to sell this business? You've come in and asked us to do it, but is that what you really want? And the client shuffled around in his seat and said, it isn't actually. It's been in the family business for 2 generations. The last thing I really want to do, but I can't see a way out given, my financial situation. whether there's another way of actually dealing with this situation. And as a result of him declaring his true desire and intent, there was in fact another strategy beyond selling the business. That's what I'm getting at, is actually the ability to craft relationships at a deeply human level, so that you get a more of an holistic and a broad-based approach and understanding of what clients really want. Now, when I talk about relationships too, I'm not just talking about relationships with clients, but in this day and age, it's important, I think, that professionals are capable of crafting good relationships with a broad range of stakeholders. Obviously, to succeed as a partner in a firm, I think you have to have a number of qualities. I think you've got to be politically adept. I think you've got to be tactful. And you've probably got to be quite sociable. And you've also got to be good at I think, communicating and crafting good relationships with your colleagues inside your particular firms. And that's almost a given. And if you can't do that, you're probably not going to be offered a role around the table as a partner. But I think that increasingly, professionals are going to have to be adept at crafting relationships across a broad range of stakeholders and other people in the community as well. And be prepared to contribute, sometimes for free. Some people already do it, they call it pro bono, but also to be outspoken about issues that perhaps are traditionally regarded as beyond the ambit of their particular work. So relationships, I think, is another area which is under consideration. And I think the third area here is in terms of reputation. Reputation is obviously vital, and reputations, I think, are built on trust. And I mentioned a little earlier that there's been, I think, a societal erosion of trust in many of our institutions, and indeed possibly in some of our professional service firms. Let's face it, I think that most people turn to professionals for independent, trustworthy advice. And in the quasi-professionals, if I can call it that, the financial and advisory services over in Australia, of course, they've been subject to the Royal Commission into their trade practices, and of course have not come out of it very well at all. And that's only heightened, I think, people's skepticism into certain practices and how they are conducted. And certainly in the banking sector, I think that from a trust point of view, I think that is one thing that is absolutely essential for all professionals to ensure that it is safeguarded. And increasingly, we are living in an age of transparency where in traditional days, professional service firms were a lot more opaque. You know, they were shrouded in a little bit of mystique, the way they operated, the way their offices were. But these days, of course, with social media and so on, it's very difficult to go and hide under a rock. Professionals and all business people have to be accountable these days. In the face of a particular crisis, they need to understand how to be able to respond in the face of a complaint or a crisis, something that may go wrong. And so anything like that risks tainting the reputation of a firm could be hugely damaging. I think we've got to be very alert to the risks involved in this, which means that the way we conduct ourselves has got to be squeaky clean. We've got to be able to respond to the increasing transparency in our society and make sure that our reputation is kept intact. One of the books, and Sam, you know, I probably read quite extensively, and I suppose I have to as part of my work, but I came across a wonderful book by a guy called John Blakey, a gentleman called John Blakey in the UK, called The Trusted Executive. Very much recommend this read for many of your listeners and viewers here today. But in there, he really explores this issue of trust, and it's a very worthwhile read. And he puts forward 3 essential qualities to ensuring that you maintain and build trust in your organizations. Those 3, he suggests, are ability, an ability to do the job that you're being asked to do. So if you are an accountant, I might come to see Sam and I expect that he's got the capability or the ability to do the numbers for me and to make sure that I act, or my business looks after itself from a tax point of view appropriately. I go and see a lawyer, I'd like to think that the advice that I'm getting is relevant to the law of the day, and that the advice I'm getting is practical and pointing me in the right direction and enabling me to make an informed choice, a considered choice at the end of the day. If you are a leader of a professional services firm, then what is the quality that entitles you to be a leader of that firm? Historically, professional service firms have tended to appoint someone whose face fits, who is politically adept, as I say, who's tactful. You don't often find the highest fee earner is willing to take on the role of being the leader or the managing partner, because conversely, occasionally a leadership position like that leads to a loss of power, or a potential loss of power, or at least a potential loss of income, because fulfilling a role like that takes a huge amount of time and effort. And in many large professional service firms, it's a full-time job. Many people who started off their careers as lawyers have gone on to migrate to becoming full-time CEOs. All they do is basically take the firm forward. And I think that is an illustration of the shift that is taking place here. An understanding in professional service firms that it is no longer a collective, that it is a full-time role that's the responsibility of, if you like, still many people right across the firm, but to drive the firm forward, I think, is responsibility rather of a few at the nerve center of the firm. And this may be made up of the managing partner, it may be made up of people on the executive, but these are the key drivers. I read a description the other day from my colleague Alistair Marshall over in Australia, who was talking about a definition of leadership. I rather liked it, but basically the task of the leader is to get people from where they are to where they haven't been. And the status quo ship, if I can put it that in professional service firms, has been basically to stay the same. Don't rock the ship. Stability is one of the things that we often have traditionally liked in our firms, partly because our clients expect us to be stable. I understand that. But in moving forward and keeping up with the times so that we do not become irrelevant, we have to introduce changes into the way, I believe, that our leadership is structured, and that's partly positional, and I think it's partly behavioral as well in our firms, so that we are being seen to act in a way that meets the expectations of our various stakeholders. I mentioned John Blakey's characteristics. Ability, therefore, is essential. And that's not just expertise, it's ability to get the job done. If you are in the driving seat as a managing or executive partner, people want to have confidence in you that you know what you're talking about. You're not there by virtue of your seniority, but you're there because you've had your eye on the horizon. You are aware of what's going on in the world. You're aware of some of the trends that are likely to impact or are impacting on your competitors and your particular firm, and importantly, your people. Do you have that ability? Have you taken yourself off to business school to understand the dynamics? And that can be a lonely place for a lot of executive partners and indeed people in executive positions in professional service firms, because they often get it and the partners don't always get it. I've heard of partners who've gone to, and CEOs who've gone to places like Harvard. Sam, I know you've actually been there. I'll be interested to chat to you maybe at the end of this webcast in terms of whether a chasm can sometimes grow between what you learn in these institutions and when you come back, you all of a sudden see life through a different lens, whereas your partners don't. They're still seeing it through the same kind of paradigm, the same lens that they always have done. All of a sudden, once you've exposed yourself to new ideas, to new case studies, to talking to other professionals and other leaders of professional service firms who've had similar challenges to you, you see life in a very different way. And all of a sudden, you then have the challenge of saying, okay, how can I translate this vision or these ideas and this inspiration? How can I affect my people with the same ideas and bring them on this journey so that we are, as collectively, going to be far more robust and resilient in the future, and we can overcome whatever vulnerabilities we may have at the moment. That's the sort of thing that I'm talking about when I talk about ability, and it's the sort of ability that John Blakey refers to in his book. The second word might be a surprise for some people, but John Blakey considers this to be an essential quality, and so do I, and that's benevolence. Be kind to people. You know, I have met people in positions of leadership in businesses and in some professional firms who are bullies. They're complete bastards, basically, occasionally, forgive the language, but it's true. People are not high on their agenda. And quite often, you know, if they are prima donnas or they're driven by ego, then they do themselves and they do their firms no favors. Good leaders respect their people, and their people are placed at number one in their agendas. And this is part of the shift that I've observed taking place around the world, is an increasing move towards achieving results through people, understanding what makes people tick, being more human. You know, PricewaterhouseCoopers has done numerous surveys globally in the last few years, and one of the crises of addressing the crisis of leadership, they say the answer is to be more human. Be more real, be more authentic in who you are and how you go about behaving in your firms. You know, take the tie off, take the jacket off, roll up the sleeves, let people get to know you, and, you know, come off your high horse. As I say, leadership is not about position, it's about disposition. And therein, I believe, is a big difference. So benevolence, being kind, I think is important. And the third aspect or characteristic trait, a fundamental characteristic trait, I believe, in a leader in a professional service firm is integrity. And that largely goes without saying. But there are instances, and I've come across instances, where people who call themselves professionals and who work in professional service firms don't meet the standard. That's all I'll say. But integrity, I think, is a no-brainer. And if obviously there are people in your organizations who don't exhibit that behavior, then they shouldn't be there. And they risk damaging the reputation of your particular firm. So ability, benevolence, and integrity, I think, three aspects towards that contribute towards the behaviors of tomorrow's leaders in professional service firms. Are there some examples of this at the moment? Yes, I think I've come across some great exemplars in this particular field. Firstly, if I can talk about organizations that are focused on this shifting agenda, the triple bottom line, the being more socially responsible. A lot of people I've come across in professional service firms are unfamiliar with the B Corporation movement around the world. I'll mention, if I can, very briefly, and there is a wonderful book which I'll mention to you as well, the B Corporation Handbook. Here it is. This is written by Ryan Honeyman and Tiffany Jana. The B Corporation, B stands for Benefit Corporation. And if you like it, it's the embodiment of what John Elkington was talking about. B Corporations are benefit corporations, of which there are, I believe now, approximately 3,500 of them globally, spread across 150 industries and across 71 countries, but with one unifying goal, and that's to use their business as a force for good. And what I love about B Corporations, and they include professional service firms in their membership, they get it. They get what I'm talking about today. They understand how society and economies are changing and how expectations of people are changing, of business, of politicians, and of professional service firms as well. And so these organizations commit to a program which becomes part of their DNA. And of course, once you're a member, you're in a network of businesses around the world who are mutually supportive, and they can learn from each other. And I think that it offers a very good example of the trend that is taking place, and I believe offers a pathway and a series of protocols for professional service firms to pursue and follow in their attempts to work towards a more socially responsible and sustainable agenda, looking at, the triple bottom line. So I commend that to you. You don't have to join to learn more about this. You can go to their website and find out more about how they conduct themselves and what some of the key measures of success are for B corporations. But just know that their numbers are growing, and their membership is not just made up of small companies. There are some substantial companies, global companies and listed corporations that are now B corporations around the world. Go and have a look and go and explore their website and learn more about them. Within my own network, I've come across a couple of leaders of professional service firms, and perhaps not surprisingly, they're from the legal sector, but I'll mention two, if I may, because I think they've distinguished themselves in this particular field. One is a gentleman called David Sharrock, who recently retired, but was the founding principal of a law firm in Melbourne called Sharrock Pittman Legal. And before David retired last year, he took time to spill his guts, basically, and share the secrets of his success in his book. And I do like to recommend books when I do, but this book of his, Fighting for Enterprise Success, is a wonderful book. It's a heavy book. There's an awful lot of intellectual property in here, checklists and roadmaps and thoughts and anecdotes based on a lengthy career. I've yet to see probably a better expose of what leadership is and how to apply it within a law firm or indeed a professional service firm environment. David writes from the heart, and he's a big people man. And it's not just highly conceptual, it's also very practical too, in terms of initiatives that they have around the office to acknowledge, make people feel special, to give them support, to give them professional development. So it's a book that I commend to you, Fighting for Enterprise Success by David Sharrock. The other person from the Northern Hemisphere who I had the pleasure of chatting to fairly recently is Robert Camp. And Robert Camp was until recently the managing partner of one of Britain's leading professional service firms, leading law firms, I should say, Stephen Scone, based in the West Country of the UK. And they were a firm that were distinguished by achieving position number 15 in the Sunday Times top 100 best companies to work for in the UK, which is no mean feat. When I read about that initially 5 years ago, I started studying some of the things that Robert and his team had done at that firm, and was very impressed. And so I've managed to have a chat with Robert recently and involve him with a number of other colleagues in recent weeks. And it's been very interesting to hear some of the initiatives that he introduced. And he makes no bones about the fact that leading a law firm is not an easy job, because there are lots of skeptics there. There are a lot of people who are resistant to change, who need to be won over. And of course, if you are in that position and people place their trust in you to guide the firm forward, you need to win them over. You need to win their confidence, and that does take time. But what I think he managed to achieve, which a lot of managing partners don't manage to achieve, is to minimize the leadership by collective, which, as I've suggested, has been the successful model in recent years, and focus the leadership and the management on a much more tight-knit unit. He's reduced the number of he's reduced the number of partners meetings, which often ended up being committee-itis, so that they're free to actually get on with their job, but they're expected to meet certain standards of behavior and be exemplars within the firm. Everyone's very clear about the purpose, where they're going, what it is that they're trying to achieve. People are crystal clear about that. And in the process, he's introduced some initiatives, some of which are great fun, but designed to make people, even though they may not be partners in the firm, have a sense of a feeling of belonging. It's where they want to be. It's where their careers are parked. They're not just there for a couple of years before diving out. And so he's worked really hard to develop a vibrant and friendly and welcoming workplace culture. And I think that is at the heart of both David Sharrock and Robert Camp's success, building a culture, a people-friendly culture where high standards are expected, but they are also mutually supportive. They have a broad perspective of what success means within their daily lives, and they go out and they enjoy their work, and they make sure that this toxicity, which has crept into a lot of workplaces in the past, doesn't creep into theirs. You can read about Robert Camp's success with Stephen Scone. Tap in to Google, and he has a very informative interview there with the Law Society Gazette in the UK. One thing I would say, he had the advantage, although it wasn't easy for him to do this, but he had the advantage of being able to persuade the Solicitors Regulation Authority in the UK to set up a model whereby non-partners were allowed to be shareholders of the business. Something, as I say, is not allowed in the legal profession here in New Zealand at the moment. I'm hoping that the latest review might take that into account, and a day will come when executives like marketing managers, senior associates, Even PAs can have shares in a professional service firm or in a law firm, because they contribute towards the success of the whole, and they are entitled, I believe, to have a say and be rewarded for such. But Robert Camp was successful in being able to do that, and full power to him as well. So those are just some thoughts and ideas for you. Now, with an eye on the clock, I just want to talk briefly about COVID. Of course, here we were ticking along. The shift was already starting to take place in professional service firms. But in my experience as an outsider, sometimes the status quo was still pretty hard to break. And then COVID came along, and all of a sudden, people were having to work from home. People were having to try and stay in touch with each other. And as a result of that, they were having to use technology like this one we're using today to keep in touch, to have those team meetings. All of a sudden, the skeptics who said working from home would never work were proved wrong, when all of a sudden we had to work from home and we still got the job done. And you know what? A lot of partners suddenly found that actually they quite liked working from home. So all of a sudden, we found that COVID has brought about a number of benefits to professional service firms. Improved communication is what I'm hearing from firms. People saying we can work from home. It's become now socially acceptable to work from home. And so long as we can focus on the outcome, not the hours, and we can get the job done, then what does it matter whether we're in a hotel, whether we're working from home, or whether we're working somewhere on the South Island? It doesn't really matter. Also, I think we've seen a greater acceptance in the take-up of technology. So people who perhaps weren't very used to using certain technologies, particularly this one, are now having to use it out of necessity. And I think one of the other benefits is that people are more open-minded now and becoming more real. You know, if I'm giving this presentation, the cat jumps on my lap, everyone has a laugh. It's, you know, it's not so staged as it was in the past. So these things, I think, have been beneficial. And to me, to my mind anyway, it's shown that COVID has actually presented a chalice of opportunity for professional service firms going forward. And at the moment, there is a tension. I know that for decision makers, they're saying, look, say, for example, a succession plan is in place. I know, Sam, that you advise firms on succession planning, but some leaders might be saying, oh, in view of COVID, do we put this on hold for the moment? Or do we put certain strategic initiatives on hold whilst this COVID risk of lockdown is taking place? And my view is do a risk assessment, be sensible about it, but don't use COVID as an excuse to put the brakes on progress. Because I think that could be procrastination and simply an excuse to get out of doing what you actually need to do. Use this as an opportunity. One of the writers that I respect greatly in Canada, Mitch Kowalski, talked with us the other day on Law Chat, this monthly series of chats that I do, and he talked about the burning platform. He was saying COVID has come along, and finally, a lot of the platforms on which leaders in professional service firms have built their empire is burning. And all of a sudden, people are saying the emperor's wearing no clothes. We have to move forward. We cannot go back and resume our bad habits. And so moving forward, I have a little acronym which I hope listeners today may find helpful. And it's built around the word courage, COURAGE. The initial, or the letter C, stands for clarify. I think this is an opportunity for law firm leaders to clarify the firm's true purpose. A lot of strategic plans were ripped up earlier this year as a result of COVID. This is a time for reflection and saying, what are we really about? Are we just about making a profit in the short term? Or are we going to jump on board the B Corporation bandwagon, even though we might not become an accredited B Corporation? Are we going to revisit our agenda and develop a broader based purpose that is going to galvanize and unite our people towards a common cause? I think that's part of the challenge of every leader, and I think it's very timely that they do it now. O is for openness. Be open to new ideas. Be open to ideas from your clients. Be open to ideas from your team members and your people. Ask for suggestions. Good leaders listen. The days of command and control are over. It's time for leaders to actually listen, to ask the questions, and to be influenced by the answers that you hear. I think the biggest catalyst for change that I've come across is when clients suddenly start telling their advisors, this is how we'd like you to change. These are aspects of the service that we'd like you to implement if you are to keep our business. And I tell you what, when clients say that, normally people sit up and start taking notice more than they do from an outsider like myself. So, point the spotlight or the microphone at your clients and your various stakeholders, involve them in the discussions around improvement, about how we go forward and how we lead our firms even better than we have done in the past. U is for understanding shareholders' concerns. I suppose it's tied to the previous idea of being open to ideas, but truly gain an understanding of some of the anxieties and pressures that your other stakeholders may be experiencing, particularly at this difficult time. The R is for resist. Resist the temptation to go back to the bad old habits and the bad old ways. COVID has arguably achieved more change in the last 3 months than an army of management consultants could achieve in a decade. Use this as an opportunity to take your firms forward and make progress. The A of courage is to ask 3 important questions. There are lots that you could ask, but how about these 3 for starters? Ask your people, what do we need to do to survive or thrive in the future? Secondly, what do we need to keep in our firm, to chuck out, to change, or to add to? And thirdly, how can we better serve our clients? A question that you could ask your people and also your clients. The G of courage is, in confusing and uncertain times, to be guided by your principles. Your principles have probably stood you and your firm in good stead for the last 2 or 3 decades. So don't betray those principles. If you find that you're unsure about decision-making in the future, go back and just remind yourselves, what are the things that have guided us in the past? And the last letter there of courage, E, is for I. Have an eye on the horizon. There has been a tendency in the past for professional service firms to measure their success based on how we're doing in the last quarter. The economic indicator of success, as I suggest, is not the main measure of success for the future-minded professional service firm going forward. And the leader or leaders of those firms, I think, need to have a clear eye on the longer-term horizon. Where are we taking this ship? And what are some of the challenges that we're going to be facing down the track in 2 or 3 years' time? I think at the very heart of this, as I wrap up, is the issue of governance. I've had discussions with various professional service firms and also people who are in executive positions in those firms. And sometimes those people have felt undermined in trying to take a firm forward only for a partner who's not well informed about the long term to use his or her vote to say, I don't like this because it makes me feel uncomfortable, therefore I'm going to vote against the direction that this executive or this managing partner is taking us in. I think that's a conflict of interest, and I think those shareholders or those partners need to be very clear which hat they're wearing at a partners meeting. Are they wearing the hat of a shareholder or as a member of the executive? Don't undermine the progress that your executives might be making simply because you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You have a certain rights that are outlined in your partnership deed and so on, but you may need to revisit that. I think the important thing is that whoever is charged with the executive authority in leading your firms forward, they need to have a very clear and concise mandate to be allowed to get on with the job. There needs to be a voice for dissension if you're unhappy with the way things are going. But once people are in that position, let them get on with the role and open up your own minds to changing how you as an individual might operate as a partner or as a senior associate so that you yourself become an admired leader in the future. You may not be in a position of leadership, but you are nevertheless a leader and a contributor to the success of your firm going forward. So I'll leave it there. And Sam, I don't know if you've had some questions coming in or whether there's something that you might like to put to me as we wrap this discussion up, but I've been talking for about 15 minutes now, probably about 5 minutes too long. So can I hand back to you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon. That's brilliant. And yes, I would confirm that COVID is actually presenting to professional service firms and practice managers and managing partners, it's a wonderful opportunity to change things and really push along change in your firms. I'm certainly noticing, Simon, clients are different now in the accounting space. I'm 50 and I am coming across senior accountants with 10 years plus experience out of university. And when we're doing a sales pitch, they're out working in the commercial sector. And they're asking some quite penetrating questions these days. They're wanting to know how our firm is going to be interacting with us. What sort of, do we have a client portal where they will have access electronically to their suite of documents that we provide for them? When we interview employees, a new employee will interview us these days. That's been a trend that's been around for some time. But they will be asking questions about how paperless our office environment is, what our electronic systems are, how we interact with clients, and what our culture is like, and how efficient we are. And there's no doubt about it that I've seen across the firm that talented employees looking for positions in firms, they will go to the teams within a firm or the firms that they perceive are providing good leadership, good mentoring and career development, and that are future focused with modern IT platforms. And it is really crucial, I think, for professional service firms to up their game in some of those areas. And as Simon has suggested, the leadership role in firms, particularly post-COVID, is going to be hugely important.
Yes,
Simon,
Sam, I see it. As you were saying there, Sam, we've had one question come in that says, so as a leader, can you work from home? Does it mean you don't need to be in the office all the time? I don't know what your view is on that, because you obviously have an office and you're a leader. But my view is that obviously during the COVID period, leaders had to work from home. And if anything, it actually upped their leadership skills and tenacity. My view to the questioner here is, yes, I do think a leader can work from home, but not all the time. I think a leader needs to be visible, and that visibility can be gained through the Zoom video technology if needs be, but there's nothing that beats human interaction. But I don't believe the leader needs to be sitting on his or her bottom in the office 9 to 5 days a week. What do you think, Sam?
I agree, Simon. I agree. I think you need to be in the office some of the time, but you most definitely don't have to be in the office every day to be an effective leader in a successful professional service firm. And we've seen clear evidence of that in recent times with our lockdowns. Simon, could you just very quickly just rattle off I've had a question come through, the COURAGE, an acronym. Could you just quickly run over run through that again, what each letter stood for?
Yeah. I just use the word courage, and sometimes I like acronyms simply because it's a way of remembering something and capturing the sort of mood at the moment. So I chose the word courage because I think there's a quality a lot of leaders in professional service firms need courage at this time. And that might mean not always being safe. It doesn't mean taking reckless risk, but I think it does mean, moving forward, be courageous in advancing the cause of your firm. So those letters stood for: 1, clarify. Be clear about the purpose of your professional service firm. And there's an awful lot that's been written about purpose, as I'm sure many people know, but obviously reconciling your own individual purpose as a professional, what is it that I want to achieve, and is this the right firm for me to achieve that, I think is part of this. But I think it does help for firms to clarify their overall purpose, what they see as being their raison d'etre, as it were. translating
Clarify
that.
purpose, openness, understanding shareholders and stakeholders' concerns, resist temptation to go back. What was the A, Simon?
The A was ask questions.
That's right.
Those 3 questions. And you actually left the screen when I asked the questions. You want me to say that what they were again? I just think they're timely questions. What do we need to do to survive or thrive?
Yep.
These questions can be asked of your stakeholders, but importantly, your people and your clients. What do we need to keep, to chuck out, to change, or to add to in our firm?
Yeah.
And thirdly, how, as far as our clients are concerned, what can we do to better serve them? They're not the only questions. I'm just saying the starters for 3 would be pretty good.
And the G and the E, Simon?
The G was for be guided by your principles. So what I'm suggesting here is if you find that you're in discussion or argument with fellow partners, sometimes you've got to go back and say, hang on a minute, let's just remember what principles we signed up to here in this partnership. They've stood us in good stead for years. Let them be the guide as we try and make decisions throughout this. And the E was to have an eye on the horizon. So looking, it's not that just short term or the long term, it's both. You need to obviously have an eye on the cash flow and how things are progressing as we go along. But in the long term, we need to have an eye on, where we're taking this firm in the future.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you so much. I think we're out of time, everyone. But thank you for your interaction. We've had great feedback and participation with this webinar, and that we will be doing more of them in the coming months. Once again, this webinar series is an example of how our firm is using this type of platform to be able to interact with our clients and supporters of the firm in an effective manner. Thank you so much for attending, and thanks again, Simon, for your generous time.